stand up. It's been a long day. And my brain just works better when I'm standing up. Okay, I did not represent any particular industry because I work in Verite. Verite is an international labor rights organization that's based in the US. And our mission is to ensure that people worldwide work under safe, fair, and legal working conditions. We are in China, Southeast Asia, Europe, Latin America, and North America, and we have partners in more than 60 countries. Because I'm coming from the research program, we do independent, customized, and policy-focused research programs. And our platform of engagement is multi-stakeholder. We work with companies, with brands, with governments, worker groups, and also trade unions and other NGOs. In fact, next week we will be training grassroots NGOs and trade unions, Indonesian grassroots NGOs and trade unions, on how to document labor abuses in palm oil plantation. Our work on forced labor and trafficking has been long. We started in 2003 because of a curiosity about how much it really costs to migrate for labor. At that time, we knew that it's costly and expensive, so we started to map the cost of labor migration. And 2007, we did research on trafficking of Filipino male. To us, it was a turning point because at that time, trafficking in persons was mainly about sexual trafficking, and rightly so. Rightly so, because it's a very serious issue. However, because the focus was solely, exclusively on sexual trafficking, then we were a bit blind to what those who are being trafficked for labor was going through. So we did that research, and then it's just non-stop. We just went on and on. In Southeast Asia, where I'm coming from, we're mainly focused on manufacturing, agriculture, and commodities. But our other offices are focusing on other commodities and other industries. In 2012, Verite became a member of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and it was during the review of the principles and criteria. So now, if you take a look at the PNC of the RSPO, then you would see standards on forced labor and trafficking. This is what we have on the website. I think this was in 2011. There's a toolkit that various stakeholders can use to look at, to start making their recruitment ethical. So it's there. The website is verite.org. And currently, we're working on this report on human trafficking in federal and corporate supply chains. And it covers a whole range of industries and commodities. That report should come out later in the year, and this is being funded by the U.S. Department of State. I am here to present this study that we released in August last year, and this is forced labor in the production of electric goods in Malaysia. I feel bad for our Malaysian friends here because the previous panel was also, was also about Malaysia. I feel do not feel persecuted at this point, but this is really just coincidence, I think. This study was funded by the U.S. Department of Labor, and we conduct the data gathering happened in 2013. These are the research questions. Do indicators of forced labor exist in the production of electronics goods in Malaysia, including the manufacture of specific electronic components and finished products, and what are those indicators? The next question had to do with whether forced labor exists in more than isolated incidents. Meaning, is it widespread in the sector or in the industry? And then third, we had to look at the relationship between labor brokers, recruiters, and other intermediaries and employers in all phases of the recruitment, because we wanted to describe what the rules are. This is a cross-sectional study. On that graph there, you would see how many female workers and male workers were interviewed and from which countries and in which regions in Malaysia. The reference period for the workers' experience was only within 12 months. We didn't want to go beyond that because then the memory started to be a bit murky. And in total, the study talked about the information from 501 workers. Certainly, we conducted more interviews in a 10-month period, but the 501 were the ones who gave significant information, meaning that they were completed at least. There were 12 researchers who worked on this report. Most of them were on the ground because we conducted the interviews in the native language of the workers. So we had, for Indonesian workers, for example, we had 2 because we were very conscious that an Indonesian woman cannot be seen with an Indonesian male in prolonged periods of time. So we had to take that into account. It was a survey research, and I will explain later on why we chose to make it a survey research rather than a qualitative research. But then we pursued the ones we see as having more interesting information, and we conducted in-depth interviews with some of them. This study approximately covers 200 factories in Malaysia. I first presented this study to the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition, and the Deputy Minister of Malaysian Anti-Trafficking Agency was there, and he said, "Can you give me that list?" Because then it would have led to prosecution. But we, Verite, as a rule, we don't name and shame companies because we'd rather focus on the systemic nature of the problem. There were consultations done with civil society, government, and business stakeholders. They knew, both government and the industry knew that we were doing the research when we were doing it. Forced labor already was, this is the framework that we used. Forced labor was earlier already defined. I will not repeat, but ILO kindly broke down this very legal definition into dimensions. So there are 3 dimensions of involuntariness and free recruitment, life or work under duress, and the possibility of leaving the employer, and then consistent with the convention definition that there has to be menace of penalty indicator. This is by no means a complete list because it can't fit into one slide. You can just take a look at the ILO website for that. But these are the indicators that we use to gauge and to assess which specific indicators are present when we talk about forced labor in Malaysian electronics industry. We use this formula. This came from an ILO study on survey estimate. So, in essence, it means that if there's one strong indicator of any, either involuntariness indicator or penalty, then it would be forced labor. An example, deception about nature of the work, which is strong involuntariness indicator, plus confiscation of passport or identity documents, which is also a strong indicator, makes it an actual forced labor situation. So that's how we computed to arrive at the response as to whether or not there's forced labor in the Malaysian electronics industry. We further broke it down because, for example, the indicator says no freedom to resign in accordance with legal requirement. In Malaysia, the only requirement is prior notice. But we had to break it down to make sure that the penalty indicator is figured into the formula. So for example, it's not possible to leave their job before the contract is finished without incurring a penalty of at least one of the following. So either they would not get their passport back, they would not get a return trip home, or return ticket home, or else there's forfeiture of savings, or they would have to pay the balance of the levy, for example. Okay, this is just another example. So Verite, for this study, understood for a forced labor indicator or finding of forced labor to be widespread if it's found to be present in more than isolated incident in the research location sample. So for example, if it's found among workers beyond a single nationality or not in terms of gender, or among workers in both top tier and smaller facilities. So eventually the key finding is 32% of the foreign workers in the Malaysian electronics industry is in actual forced labor situation. And I have to flag at this point that this is minimum estimate. And I will show you later on why I say that it's just minimum. So, and then we said that forced labor is found to be systemic and widespread. Why? This is why I said it's minimum, because this is just, 139 respondents exhibited the complete one, meaning that there's strong involuntariness or medium involuntariness and strong penalty or medium penalty. But it doesn't mean that the rest of them did not exhibit any other indicator. So for this 362 or 81% of the respondents, they exhibited 3 or more indicators of forced labor. It's just that, there's no combination of involuntariness and penalty, but certainly like 3 out of so many were present. So these are the specific indicators that we found. The recruitment fees and debt-related fees, recruitment-related debts is actually almost a root cause of the problem already. 92% of the foreign workers paid some sort of recruitment fee, and 94% of those were onerous or ethically high fees. We also found inability to resign contract. So 57% of foreign workers said they could not resign without suffering any form of penalty, be it heavy fine or financial penalty or losing their passport. Passport retention is a big issue. 94% of foreign workers that we interviewed at the time did not have their passports with them, and 71% of those were not sure how they can get them back. There's also limited freedom of movement. 62% of foreign workers felt that they are able to move freely. And 22% talked about deceptive recruitment, about the terms and conditions of employment. Okay, here are some specifics. Median, this is median. Most of them paid a range of 3,500 to 3,900 ringgit for recruitment fees. And this is a comparison between the amount of recruitment fee and so this is the average recruitment fee, the one in blue, and the one in red is the average monthly income. What it means is that in a 2-year contract, a foreign worker in Malaysia in electronic would be working for a year only to pay off the debt. So 77% of them had to borrow money to pay the fee. And for 95% of workers, it took longer than 3 months to pay off the debt. And this is what I was saying, that 50% of them had to work 1 year to pay off the debt. So the rate of forced labor was higher among those who were currently indebted or those who were indebted still at the time we interviewed them than it was in the general respondent pool. So 48% among current debt holders were in actual forced labor situation versus the 28% that did not have the debt at that time. It doesn't mean that they were not in debt, because all of them were in debt. It's just that when we interviewed them, some of them have already paid off. Inability to resign contracts had to do with that, paying the balance of the levy. Earlier in the previous session, someone asked about the levy, and thank you for that, because then I can speak about that. For manufacturing, the levy is still 1,250 ringgit a year. So and it's being taken in 2011 or 2012. The levy was passed on to the worker. It used to be the employer paying it, not that they weren't passing it on anyway. But then it became legal that the workers start paying the levy themselves. So what it means is that 104 ringgit every month is taken out of the 900 monthly minimum wage if they're getting 900. So a worker who wants to leave after 2 months for many reasons, he or she didn't like Malaysia, they did not like the work, they wanted to go back and not finish the contract, that worker would have paid the balance of the levy plus the recruitment fee and also the air ticket home. So in total, that person would need 4,600 something ringgit to go back home. So then, it compromises your ability to resign or your ability to go back when you don't want to work anymore. 31 of the respondents were told that they could not pre-terminate their contracts without paying the balance of the levy. Let me make it clear. We are not making any judgment on the levy. Levy per se is not an indicator of forced labor. What made it an indicator of forced labor was when it was used as penalty for resigning. And so we dig further because we wanted to understand. And we found out that the Malaysian government doesn't have a facility for levy refund for workers pre-terminating. They only allow refund of the levy if the worker did not pass the medical test, so he's found to be medically unfit, or the worker did not show up at all. But there is no way to refund the levy if the worker wanted to go home sooner. So that's what drove this vulnerability to forced labor. Passport retention, I already mentioned. So what I want to point out here is that in this study, we were actually very strict in our interpretation, because not only did we ask if they don't have their passport, we also asked whether they could get it back, because then they could have consented or something. But if we just go by the Malaysian legal parameter, which means that no one should be holding anyone else's passport, and then the numbers jump up. So it becomes that 66% of all foreign workers would have been in actual forced labor situation, and that's bad news. I mean, right now it's bad news. This report actually resulted to them being, well, among many factors, resulted to them being downgraded last year to Tier 3. And that was the basis of 32%. If we showed 66%, maybe they would have still been in Tier 3 this year. A limited freedom of movement, and this is mainly tied to the passport retention. If you don't have your passport, where can you go? It's hard to get around. They would only have photocopies of their passports, and that wasn't enough for the police to convince the police that they were there legally. Living conditions, degrading living condition is one strong indicator of voluntariness, and 24% of them were living in really poor housing conditions. Am I done? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, and yeah, okay, I need to wrap up. Deceptive recruitment was a bit low, not because they weren't deceived. It's just that workers did not have a good understanding or good memory of what they're supposed to be getting when they arrive in Malaysia. By employer type, we've seen that those who are outsourced or hired by outsourced agencies, the incidence is higher versus the one that were directly hired by the facility, but even then, it's 25%. Okay, I'm almost done. So I don't want to discuss this anymore. So, in conclusion, it's really, this is both employer practices or those that are seen as allowed, like, passport retention. That's not allowed by law, but then it's industry practice. So it's both employer practice and the systemic gaps that contribute to creating workers' vulnerability to forced labor. I just have very quick 3 points to conclude. First of all, having gone through using the ILO formula, I have to say that the distinction between what is strong and what is medium is actually superficial. It's artificial. There should not be any value judgment on the uniqueness or the gravity of your migration experience. So someone who is deceptively recruited with financial penalties, both are medium, then it's not forced labor. I don't agree, and that there's value judgment there that we have to interrogate. The second one is, for those who are interested to carry out research like this, or any kind of research on forced labor trafficking, I think we've reached the point when it's just not enough to say that there's forced labor. We are looking for solutions. So what will be valuable would be to identify just which specific indicators are present so that the governments will know, the governments in business will be able to address them slowly. Because as long as we keep saying that there's forced labor, and it remains that abstract concept, then, and as it is, forced labor and trafficking are big issues. It will take us forever to solve. But if we don't start with the ones we can solve in the short term, then we really can't get there. So I guess that's my plea, that's my request to those who are advocates. And then the third and final point is that governments, and I was very curious to find out the participants here, and it's good to know that you are coming from governments. Governments should know what business needs to comply. The Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition, for example, has very strong standards around forced labor and trafficking. But if we have a country like Vietnam that allows $4,000 US as recruitment fee to migrate, then it's hard for business to comply, especially those who have moved to zero fees. Apple has moved to zero recruitment fee, HP has moved. The whole industry is moving towards having zero fees. So if there's no regulation on the sending country, then it's hard for the business to comply with their own standards. So my request is that the government should find out what kind of support business needs so that they're able to comply with their own standards around forced labor trafficking.